Right now, President Biden is considering canceling debt for the 43 million Americans who have student loans. Now, this policy is incredibly popular with the American public, no matter who you ask. And that includes people with student loans and people without student loans. Big majorities support cancellation. And I think the reason for that is that there is scarcely a working person in America who does not have a friend, a family member, a coworker who is weighed down by student loan debt. But if you're listening to the talking heads with fancy degrees who oppose this policy, you might be under the impression that the borrowers who the president wants to help are all wealthy. They're all wealthy Harvard grads who don't need any help with their loans. So what I'd like to do is just look deeper into the data. Dr. Bishop, you're an expert on student borrowers and their experience in the student loan system. What does the data say about who borrows money to attend college? Are they generally very wealthy?
I think the data is quite clear that those who borrow student loans are not wealthy, that they are not people who have high levels of assets, that more than half of borrowers with student loans, or more than half of student debt is held by families with zero or negative household health. And especially when we're looking at communities of color, where again, we see almost 90% of Black students borrowing student loans compared to 68% of white students. So the idea that student loans are carried by wealthy families, I think is something that doesn't show up in the data, and also is something that, again, goes against what we understand as rich people or wealth in this country.
Okay, so these are people who are borrowing are people with, at best, very modest means. Let's take a look then about the kinds of schools they attend. Do most borrowers take out loans so they can attend elite schools or business schools, Dr. Bishop?
No, and as someone who's a low-income student who went to one of these elite schools, we know that the vast majority of borrowers are not coming from the Ivy League, that when we look at those selective schools, we see around 0.3% of all borrowers come from the Ivy Leagues.
Wait a minute, Dr. Bishop, can you say that one the other way? What proportion of student loan borrowers are not coming from the Ivy Leagues?
So 99% come from institutions that are not the Ivy League.
99.7, according to your data,
Yes.
right? Okay. So they're not coming from the Ivy League. So let's do one more. Critics argue that canceling student loans would mean helping out people who are earning good money with their college degrees and will be able to pay off their loans without the government stepping in. Dr. Bishop, are those valid criticisms? Are student loan borrowers all earning college graduate wages and in a good position to pay off their loans?
No, so we know that 40% of student loan borrowers have student debt but do not have a college degree. We know that increasingly many student loan borrowers are parents who do not have this so-called lifetime earning trajectory ahead of them, that when we look at Black students, we know that they owe more than they originally borrowed a decade out, and that 20 years out, they've only paid down on average 95%, or they still owe 95% of their original student loan balance.
So, Dr. Bishop, can I ask you just unpack that just a little bit? So, students go into college, right? And they borrow while they're in school. And you said what proportion of them never graduate from college?
40% of student loan borrowers.
40%. So 4 out of every 10 of the students who's carrying student loan debt, do they make college grad wages?
Absolutely not.
No. So here they are. They're earning like high school grads, but all they're getting, but they're managing college loan debt. And then you also said people don't think of it this way. You borrow money, but for what proportion of Black students did you say 12 years out from when they started borrowing money are actually deeper in debt?
So we know 66% of Black student loan borrowers over a decade out are deeper in debt, owe more than they originally borrowed.
And why do they owe more than they originally borrowed?
Because we understand that Black students not only borrow more, but they access higher ed institutions that are more likely to be for-profits and predatory, to be institutions that are already under-resourced themselves, and that they're navigating a higher ed system that is very different than their white counterparts as far as opportunities and accessibility.
Yeah. And I assume also we're talking about what kind of wages they earn when they come.
Absolutely. So entering the labor market, which often doesn't get as much attention in these conversations, we still have persistent employment gaps, racial income gaps, that even as Black people earn more degrees, we still see our wages not reflecting that.
I appreciate this. You know, it's clear that the opponents of student loan cancellation are living in a bubble of privilege that is completely disconnected from the reality of the people who borrow money to get an education. As you said, 99.7% of borrowers did not get an Ivy League degree. Heck, 40% of them didn't get any degree at all. The majority of these loans are held by people with zero wealth. And Black borrowers are not just treading water trying to keep up with their payments, they're actually falling behind. Meaningful student loan debt cancellation is the single most powerful thing the President of the United States could do on his own to help narrow the racial wealth gap among borrowers, to help families that are struggling with rising costs, and to expand opportunities for millions of people. You know, we need to stop listening to out-of-touch pundits and politicians whose biggest worry is that we might be helping working people too much. Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Thank you,
Senator
Mr.
Warren.
Chairman.